1. Welcome to another edition of the PhinManiacs.com podcast. I am your host, Louis Song, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Chad Ronnebaum. And joining us this evening is one of our newest writers for the PhinManiacs.com. It is Tom Shannon at Bearing the News. So this is actually going to be a very interesting show because Tom is also a very avid Bears fan, on top of knowing a lot about the Miami Dolphins. So he's going to be able to provide some interesting perspective on Adam Gase since he got to watch him every single week. So, but first, what we have to talk about this evening is that the Dolphins free agency is continuing, and while I don't necessarily have a problem with what's happening here, the way it's happening may be something of a problem in the eyes of a lot of Dolphins fans. And then later on, about halfway through the show, we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit of history. And see, the thing with Tom is that while he knows a lot about the Dolphins, he doesn't understand the history of the Miami Dolphins all that well. We're going to teach him a little bit about the greatness that is Dan Marino and why some comments made by certain people were certainly bad. Certainly. So, but first and foremost, Dolphins free agency. What's going on right now is that it seems that the Miami Dolphins are swinging and missing at every single player that they are quote-unquote interested in, and this is making a lot of Miami Dolphins fans very, 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 let's say, frustrated. That's a nice way of putting it, I think. Right now, what they are actually doing is they are raging, they are screaming, they are hollering, they're calling for Tannenbaum to be fired and for Ross to sell the team. So what else is new? But this is the awful part about all of this is that it really is a no-win situation here because this is just me feeling perspective. So the Dolphins wanted to get C.J. Anderson. They tried to front load a contract so that Denver wouldn't sign. They did match the contract that he was offered, and so C.J. Anderson is going back to Denver. Okay, oops. John Elway trolled the Dolphins. So what else is new? John Elway trolls everybody. He always seems to make something happen, even if it's nothing. So. And then the Dolphins, of course, they let Lamar Miller go. We already discussed that last week. They let go of all their pretty much all of their unrestricted free agents for better or worse. Lamar Miller went to Houston for I think it was $6.5 million a year. That's a little high for a running back, but I mean he's a really good running back. Olivier Vernon got $17 million a year. That is higher than he should ever have any business of making. But I mean, good for him. He got paid, but he certainly wasn't going to get that much from Miami. In fact, I wouldn't have even paid them half that much. And, of course, Miami still hasn't signed an honest-to-goodness guard. Instead, they signed Jermon Bushrod and Sam Young, who are both tackles, to be their backup offensive linemen. And they seem content to let Dallas Thomas, Billy Turner, and Jamil Douglas compete for the last guard spot along with Jermon Bushrod, who is going to be bumped inside. So, I'm going to get your thoughts on this whole thing, guys, and I'm actually going to start with Tom since he's new to the show, and I want to get your perspective on how you feel this Dolphins free agency is going. I mean, are you okay with the Dolphins just letting all these guys go, not spending this money, or is there something along the lines here that we should be worried about?
No, I'm not okay with it. I'm not a big fan of drafting and developing players so that they can go to other franchises. And I understand that Olivier Vernon, made an unbelievable amount of money by letting himself hit free agency. But let's just say that you were going to let him go. There were other guys that I think that they could have made an effort to re-sign, younger guys that could have remained building blocks for this organization. And I might add that had they tried a little harder to sign them in the last offseason and extend them rather than letting them run their contracts out, they could have had them at what would have probably turned out to be very, very reasonable prices. And that might include Vernon. But even if you leave him out, my gut feeling is that Lamar Miller, maybe a Derek Shelby, some of these guys could have been had, and they're relatively young. These are players that you drafted and developed, pretty solid players. Lamar Miller, better than solid, that I think it would have been pretty nice to have around. And instead of having these young building blocks around, the team's gotten older, and I would say arguably it has failed to get better. The one thing that really sticks out to me about the approach that Tannenbaum's made, I guess it fits with his background, which really is more administrative than it is in personnel. He cut his teeth in the NFL in Cleveland under Belichick as an assistant in the personnel department, and he would perform the same task in New Orleans, and then he became a contract negotiator with the Jets. He held all kinds of administrative positions. The guy doesn't really have a personnel background, and so when he walks into free agency, it's a little bit like you and me walking into a grocery store and looking for name brands. Ooh, there's a Mario Williams. He's on sale. Let's pull him off the shelf. And ooh, there's Kiko Alonso. And hey, it's buy one get one free. We'll get a cornerback with him. Let's pull them off the shelf. Now we've got Byron Maxwell. I really kind of wonder if Tannenbaum isn't approaching this more like a fantasy football GM than he is a real GM that gets in, sits down, looks for young building blocks, does all the dirty work, and really puts in the work that's necessary to find the guys that you need to build a team from the ground up and get the team from 6-10 into a really competitive situation, not just for this year, but for years to come. And I see a lot of short-term moves, and that's despite the fact that the owner pretty much came out at the beginning of the offseason and said that he wanted to be patient. He didn't expect the team to be turned around right away. He made all the right noises about building long-term, but most of the actions seem to argue against that. And it seems more like they're trying to win this year and turn it around all at once rather than building a solid foundation that you can build upon and really compete consistently with for years to come. So that's my problem with it. In terms of the individual players, this technique of offering medium contracts to big name players after a down year, like they're doing with Mario Williams, might work, might not work. I think there's good reason to believe that it might not. I think, sure, Byron Maxwell, he'll be in a better situation for him, a better scheme, but I'm not sure scheme was really his issue last year. I think he was a mediocre NFL cornerback last year because he wasn't surrounded by all pro talent anymore like he was in Seattle. That's going to be the case in Miami. He'll probably be a nice, solid corner, but he's not going to be a number one that you're going to put on Brandon Marshall, the way they tried to do with Brent Grimes. It failed last year. In terms of Mario Williams, yeah, he played outside linebacker with Buffalo. And that was his excuse for not doing very well and for all practical purposes for pretty much quitting on the team. But I'd like to point out that he played outside linebacker in 2011 for 5 games before he got injured, and he had 5 sacks in those 5 games. So I think he can play outside linebacker. I think the problem might be that he's lost skills. And I think betting on him to come back and be better this year than he was last year, just because he's playing defensive end, maybe. But I think there's good reason to doubt that. So, these are fairly big gambles on players that, they're trying to get sort of on the cheap, and it might work and it might not work. But I'd rather that they signed younger guys that they had dug for and found that they thought they could fully develop, that are on the ascending, and they're not doing that. Instead, they're going the veteran route for the most part, and apparently trying to win now. So it'll be interesting to see how it works out.
How about you, Chad? Any thoughts on what he said?
Yeah, I'm not overly upset with what they're doing right now because I want to see how free agency plays out. And I think the Dolphin fans, from what you see on Twitter anyway, and the people that follow them closely in the offseason, they've been used to for years now Miami making big splashes. We got Mike Wallace, and he was one of the top free agents that year. We got Brandon Albert. He was one of the top free agents. We've got Ndamukong Suh. He was one of the top free agents. And so we've been going through this cycle where they're used to Miami gunning for the top players. And what that was, I believe, any more than whoever was being the GM was Ross doing everything that he thought he could do to make the team a winner. And so he was basically saying, look, money's not the object. If we can get these guys and we can get our team into the playoffs, let's do it. The problem is Miami has not made the playoffs since 2008. And so despite getting all of the top available talent through money, it we ended up 6-10 this year. Despite giving Ndamukong Suh the biggest free agent contract. Is that Ndamukong Suh's fault? I don't know that it is, but I think you're looking at them maybe starting to rethink their approach a little bit. And so I think right now the idea is we aren't just going to stock up on free agents if they're being overpaid. And I absolutely feel like Olivier Vernon, I think the Giants are going to deeply regret the contract they gave him. I don't think he's a bad football player, but they're paying him like a dominant player that can take over a game. And he's never done that. He's never been remotely close to being a dominant player. And I think a similar thing could be said about Lamar Miller. He has never been an Adrian Peterson type running back that just takes over a game. And so giving those guys those massive contracts to me is just putting yourself in a position to be mediocre. So when I look at Mario Williams, I'm not huge on Mario Williams being this, great. I absolutely think he's a defensive end. I mean, the guy is 6'6", pushing 300 pounds. He's like 280, 290. And so, I mean, realistically, there's no way he would be fast enough to play linebacker, which is what he was frustrated by because they were putting him in coverage a lot. And that would be pretty crazy in my mind, considering how big he is. But is he long-term better than Olivier Vernon? No, I don't believe that he is, but he's also nowhere near the contract of Olivier Vernon. And I do believe he'll probably be better in run defense than Olivier Vernon. So I kind of understand the moves. I think you're seeing a lot of frustration, though, because money talks. That is what the NFL is about. And you do get the rare cases where teams give a home team discount or where a player will sign with a coach he prefers to play with. But it's ultimately about money. And so Miami has not been paying big contracts to mediocre players because I think they're starting to figure out all that does is give you a mediocre football team. And so the draft is going to be really important. And I think that has a lot to do with the Lamar Miller and Olivier Vernon departures is we're getting compensation picks. And if you look at in the NFL and look at teams that have historically received a lot of compensation picks, those teams are like the Patriots and the Ravens. And I think those teams realize the value of getting affordable talent, through the draft. And I think that's what Miami was thinking when, yeah, we've lost Olivier Vernon and yes, we've lost Lamar Miller, but we're also getting like third and fourth round picks back for these guys more than likely in future years. And so it makes some sense to me. But with that being said, I mean, there is concerns because, I know that Mike Tannenbaum got a lot of hype this week because he said the 2016 team would stomp the 2015 Dolphins. Well, firstly, I'm thinking, well, you're not really saying much to say you could stomp a 6-10 team. But secondly, I don't believe him right now. I think the Dolphins have a ways to go to get their team fielded. But I think the most important point I'm trying to make is wait until the draft's over and wait until free agency is actually over, because I actually believe Miami's going to get, some players that will probably be of similar caliber that are going to be some mid-level players, but they'll get them on much more affordable contracts. And so I think what they're doing does make some sense. But overall, I'm really only concerned about the cornerback position right now. I know everybody's talking about guard, and people are now all worried because we didn't get C.J. Anderson at running back. But I'm just telling you, guard and running back are not that difficult to fill in the mid rounds. You can get good guards and good running backs in rounds 2 through 4 in the NFL draft. What you can't get are good, solid cornerbacks. And right now, we do not have that. And Miami clearly chose not to pay a decent cornerback, but not great cornerbacks. You kind of saw them cycle through town. At first everybody thought, well, we're going to go get Pac-Man Jones. Is Pac-Man Jones a shutdown corner? No, but he's a guy you can line up on Sunday and he's competitive. Several guys have went through and we've seen them not sign with their team. So Miami has decided that they're not going to pay an average cornerback that's a veteran and overpay him a contract. And so I think the real interesting thing, or what the 2016 season is going to boil down to, is how does Miami field their defensive backfield? Because right now, Byron Maxwell is a decent corner. I feel comfortable with him on the field, but he's definitely not a guy you feel like is going to be a Pro Bowl caliber player. You can just match up against anybody. And, after him, we're talking about Tony Lippett, we're talking about Bobby McCain, and you're talking about players that are completely unproven. And it scares me to think about lining those guys up against Tom Brady right now. I'm not that worried to go into the season starting Jamil Douglas and Billy Turner at guard. I think we'll get another guard, but I think we can win with those guys. I'm not that worried to pick up a veteran running back later or draft a running back in another round and pair him with Jay Ajayi. I think we can win with that. But this team will absolutely get decimated if we do not have the ability to put three solid defenders on the field in the defensive backfield. And I just don't see it right now. I see our defensive backfield in shambles. So I'm curious to see how that plays out through the rest of free agency and the draft.
And I also wanted to point out that I wouldn't agree with Tom's stance that they're in win now mode, because other than the move to get Mario Williams, he's pretty much the only guy I can think of that is really a guy you don't see coming for the future. Because Byron Maxwell, if he plays well in Vance Joseph's scheme, you can work with him in the future. If Kiko Alonso comes back to form, you can work with him in the future. These are still young players who can be worked with. Now, I understand his point about drafting your own players and signing your own players, and especially in the case of Olivier Vernon, if your own player is going to be commanding a payload that is way beyond anything that we'd be willing to pay. Let's look at it this way. The market has a way of messing with the perspectives of people. And you see Olivier Vernon getting $17 million a year. That's more than J.J. Watt would have gotten on the free agent market when he was on the free agent market. And I don't even know if he made it to the free agent market, but I think he's getting like 15 or 16 million a year. So for OV to get 17 million, is OV even anywhere remotely close to the caliber player that is JJ Watt? The answer to that is a big fat no, and I guarantee that the New York Giants fans will be very, very upset with the fact that they're giving that much money to somebody who's really not all that special. That's why I wasn't really sad to see OV go, other than from just a personal standpoint, because I've met the guy, I've met his mom, they're very nice family, but he's not worth 17 million a year. I wouldn't have even given him 10 million a year. I wouldn't even given him 9 million. He's not that good, and a lot of what he's done is just giving. He was rated by PFF to be given the most pressures out of any defensive end in football or something like that. Okay, but most of those pressures came like 5-6 seconds after the ball was snapped, and it was just kind of a way of the quarterback just looking around, taking his dear sweet time, and then finally he got loose. And like, okay, so that really doesn't do much for anything. So he's taking advantage of the fact that the quarterback can't decide where to throw the football, because there's just so many options. So and as for Lamar Miller, he's pretty much the only one that I was actually really sad to see go, because I like Lamar. He's a really good running back, and I think the Dolphins dropped the ball on not letting him go. But it's a running back. It's the running back position. I try not to devalue it when I can, but at the same time, there's still that argument that you can always just draft another one. There's a bunch of them out there, and you can find some in the draft. There are a lot of the draft guys that I respect. They've already pointed out, well, there's this running back and this running back and this running back, and they'll be available round 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever. So there are replacements, and it's not like the Dolphins are without a option at running back right now. You were the one who wrote this, Tom, that Jay Ajayi is still there and he has upside. So the question is no longer about, well, do the Dolphins have a running back? They do. He's just not proven. He's not somebody that we've seen run all the time, like a CJ Anderson. We would have known what we were getting in CJ Anderson. We don't know what we're getting in Jay Ajayi yet. Now, I got a lot of flack earlier today for saying that Ajayi is not a bruiser running back, but he's not. guys. He likes to bounce outside. He likes to see if he can kind of squeeze through areas. He's not somebody. He's not going to run a whole bunch of people over. And if he does, he's certainly not going to be able to do it on a regular basis. He runs hard. I'll give him that. But sometimes running hard doesn't help that much. Sometimes it takes more than just being able to do that. It takes vision. It takes knowing where to run, where to take off, where to make your breaks. You gotta. There's more, and Ajayi still has a lot to learn about that. I don't see him as a bruiser running back, and I think Chad, you were the one who told me. Who was it? You? What was it that you said about Ajayi that he's not a bruiser so much?
Yeah, I did an extensive film review of him in college, and I've watched him in the preseason, and what you're getting with Ajayi is he is phenomenal, and I don't know how to stress how good he is at cutbacks. He's extremely quick at doing cutback runs, and that's where he's special. He doesn't have unbelievable straight edge speed. Certainly not Lamar Miller, breakaway speed. And he, despite his weight and his size, he tends to run upright into contact. He's absolutely fearless, and he's absolutely aggressive. If you get him in space, he doesn't slow down for contact, but I've seen footage after footage of him literally getting blown up because he doesn't lower his shoulder, and he takes unbelievable hits sometimes. And so the point I was making to you is this Jay Ajayi right now, unless they can get him coached a little bit better, needs to learn to lower his shoulder in the NFL because he won't survive in the NFL without getting hurt. And, true to form, it didn't take him very long to get hurt. I mean, wasn't it a rib injury he ended up getting? In the NFL, the guys are just too big and too powerful to run into coverage. You've got to be able to get your shoulder down and protect yourself. And you also need to be able to do that to get yards after contact, which is what you have to be able to do as a power running back. So, in my opinion, what Jay Ajayi is a really good change of pace back. He's going to take advantage of tired or unathletic linebackers with his cutback abilities. And I think he'll be successful, especially now in year 2 with Miami. But to me, C.J. Anderson was a really good compliment for him because I like the idea of putting a real bruising power running back with Jay Ajayi. So I think you got to keep it in perspective, and I think Miami fully knows that. I don't think they're intended on going into this season and planning on giving him 25 carries a game. I don't think unless he's dramatically changed his running style, he just won't hold up without injury. So I'm sure they're going to be looking at other free agent backs, or they'll look in the draft. And C.J. Anderson's good. I like him, but he's not this especially elite back. There are a lot of similar backs you can get in the middle of the draft or even in free agency. I saw one on Twitter just like an hour ago that I'm like, that's a good point. And that was, I'm trying to think of how you pronounce his name. He was the running back for the Vikings.
Matt Asiata.
Matt Asiata. I mean, to me, he's a very comparable back to C.J. Anderson for what you bring to the Dolphins. It's a guy that's a power back. It doesn't have tremendous breakaway speed, but a guy that you can just pound in there and then change pace with the Ajayi. So they'll be fine with that at running back. You just got to be patient because, again, they have options. I think they threw their price out there. Obviously, Denver jumped above it, but again, C.J. Anderson isn't a guy that I think is going to take this team from 6-10 to 10-6, and so I don't think they wanted to overpay him either. So I have no problem with what the Dolphins. I thought Denver looked way more foolish than the Dolphins because they could have tendered him differently and saved money actually. So rather than tendering him, they just paid him more money in the market because I assume Denver didn't expect him to get the offer that he did. One other thing I wanted to respond to, though, Lewis, on your point there was on Olivier Vernon. You made the point that one of the reasons he got such a huge contract was he got rated with so many quarterback pressures. And if you've watched much film or watched Olivier Vernon, he has a kind of a duck move he does when he gets close to the quarterback. And that tends to bring him in low on quarterbacks. And that was one of the reasons he had so many personal foul penalties. A very good example of a bad one was when he hit Mariota in the Tennessee game. What is significant about that is right now the NFL is doing their rules committee in their meeting, and that's one of the hot
Chad,
topics. Yeah.
Hang on a second. We have a caller, Tony. I believe it's Tony. And Tony, we're going to get you in just a moment, man. You're on the air right now, but I want to let Chad finish his point. So I'm sorry, Chad. Go ahead.
Oh, my point being is I fully expect the NFL competition committee to really scale up the personal foul penalties on low hits on quarterbacks this year, where defenders, particularly the defensive linemen, are coming in low at their feet. And if you look at Olivier Vernon's quarterback pressures, he does that a lot. And so my question is if the NFL is going to really make that a point of emphasis, is he going to even be able to do those quarterback pressures if he's going to be getting penalized a lot on doing that duck move close to the quarterback and going in, low on them? So that's another point of concern for the Giants right now, paying somebody like him $17 million, because Olivier Vernon does not blow by people like Cameron Wake. And so I'm highly skeptical Olivier Vernon's going to come into New York and be throwing up like 15 sacks or something like that, was for what you would expect for somebody getting paid like that.
All right, and I would agree with that too. And okay, so sorry, Tony, we're making you wait, but go ahead and what's on your mind today, man?
No problem. I agree with y'all sentiment on Olivier. I mean, I remember the first 6 games of the year, he was practically invisible. I mean, he really didn't take off until Cam got hurt in the New England game, and then he started to come on at that point. But I was watching the NFL Network. What's the show? The 7:00 show for those guys. Can't think of the name of the show now. I'm going brain dead. But anyway, Michael Robinson made the point about the Giants and how they're spending in free agency, and he basically said, and I agree. He said they're paying these guys all this money, and there's not a single Pro Bowler on that list. And I made that point in the blog I wrote for FinFever about Olivier. I'm like, they're paying him close to the Ndamukong Suh type money. And I'm like, Ndamukong Suh came to Miami, and Miami got really criticized for the signing. But I'm like, this is a full-time All-Pro, 4-time Pro Bowl player that the Dolphins paid. And it's not like he was coming to Miami off of getting paid chump change. He was making 14, 15, 16 million in Detroit. Detroit wanted him back. So, I never understood the criticism that Miami got in regards to the money that they paid him. I mean, they paid for an impact player, a player that can cause havoc in the middle of your offensive line. There was some criticism about seeing his play this year, and he have played better yet, but he still finished third among defensive tackles and tackles for loss. And there were plenty of plays where I saw Ndamukong being double teamed and even chipped on triple teamed sometimes. I mean, that tells me that if you've got one guy being double teamed, the rest of the defensive front is not doing their job, and the linebackers not doing their job in regards to the run defense and how bad it was for this team this year. But in regards to free agency and the first gentleman and talking about Miami looking to win now, I look at Maxwell and I look at Kiko Alonso, and both of those guys are less than 27 years old. So these are younger guys that Miami traded for. Mario is 31, but I think Mario's got 2-3 good years at least left in him. I just think he was in a defensive system with Rex Ryan that didn't work for him. But, prior to that, Mario had double-digit sacks in the year prior. He was coming off a 14-sack season, so 14.5-sack season. So I still think Mario, he's got something to prove this year, too, because he was getting dogged out pretty good with people saying he quit. He was a cancer in the locker room. So I think Mario's got something to prove. But the C.J. Anderson decision was disappointing this afternoon. I was hoping we could get C.J. Like y'all guys said, he's not a spectacular back, but he's a good, solid running back that knows the Adam Gase system. And I think that was probably the bigger thing that Adam was looking at is, here's a running back that knows my system, can come in and help the guys with the system learn what to do and what not to do in this system. I think that's something that Adam was looking at as well. And Lewis, I don't know if you saw the tweet that I sent to you, but I think CJ wanted to come to Miami. I think CJ was looking forward to coming to Miami. So I think he said all the right things about Denver, matching the offer. But I think he was a little put off with the fact that the Broncos put such a low tender on him to begin with. But looking at the running back class, I mean, I don't think Miami's going to be in a position to get Ezekiel Elliott with the trade that dropped them down from 8 to 13. But obviously, if he's there, I think you got to jump on him. But, there's some backs that I definitely like. Alex Collins is a kid that I like out of Arkansas. He runs hard. He fits well in his own blocking type scheme. He's a bigger back at 5'10", about 217, 220 pounds. I just saw some clips today on this kid, Jordan Howard. I asked Ian about him, and I know Ian is not a fan, but, I mean, I'm looking at this kid, and he may not be a burner, but he's 230 pounds, too. I think he probably runs like a 4.5, 4.6. But I like what I've seen of him. CJ, you pronounce it Porces, the kid from Notre Dame. I probably butchered his last name. He's young at the running back position, but he looked good in his first year as a running back with Notre Dame, and he's got very good speed, and he's got nice size at 6 foot, 220 pounds. And another back that I like is Kelvin Taylor, the kid from Florida. I think I like the way he runs. So I think this is not a bad running back class. It's not a tremendous running back class. Devontae Booker might be a kid that you want to look at as well. But I think Miami can find a back that will work with Jay. I think Jay is going to be a nice back for Miami. I heard you guys talking about him not being a power back, and I kind of agree with that. But I think he's a back that runs hard. I think he's a back that he's versatile as far as his ability to catch the ball and be an every down back for you if you need to be. But I know that's something that Gase is not going to want to do. He's going to have him share carry so he doesn't burn him out. But so far, I'm waiting to see how the rest of the free agency play out. Like y'all guys said, I think they were on a hold for a while, waiting on the decision from C.J. Anderson. But I'm interested in seeing what they're going to do here. The next week or so in regards to players. I've been a proponent of Patrick Robinson, but it didn't seem like Miami's had much interest in him so far. But he's been on a couple of visits that hadn't been signed yet, so maybe he gets into a dollar figure that Miami wants to get him at. And have y'all guys heard anything about Andre Branch and where things stand with that? Because he was in for a visit today, I know.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot to talk about with the offseason. Tony, thanks for calling and giving us your thoughts, man. We really appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, so that was Tony, and he called in last week, so maybe we're going to have ourselves a regular caller. Now what I want to do is that I want to introduce two more people who have come into the show. First of all, I'm going to go in order of who called in first. So Chris Early, otherwise known as Duke, a very good friend of mine, he is here. Duke, nice to have you on.
Hello.
And Ron Kniff of Unsquish the Fish, who has recently joined the website and has become one of my writers, along with Tom. So, Ron, thanks. Good to have you on, too.
What's going on, guys?
Well, right now we're going to be talking. We're still talking some off-season before we go into our history lesson for the night. So, since you guys have joined in, I'm going to start with you first, Duke. What are your first impressions about the Dolphins off-season?
Well, I wasn't pleased they didn't sign Miller. I was a big fan of Miller. I think he is an ascending back. I think he was more talented than he was allowed to show in the previous years. And for what he signed for, I mean, it could have been like $10, $12 million a year. That's one thing. But for what he signed for, that's the only explanation to me that would make sense is if he just did not want to come back to Miami. And he even kind of took a little dig at the previous staff when he said, at his press conference, he said, well, in Houston, they know how to use running back. And that's not a diss against Gase, obviously, because he never worked under him. But, it did show that he was kind of upset over his lack of usage, which we already knew that, but that may have been a deciding factor. Everything else, I'm kind of okay with. I figured Brent Grimes would be gone. I figured Grimes would be gone just based on age, contract, all that other stuff. Even before all of the Nico Grimes incidents happened, I kind of figured this was his last year just because of all the other factors. I mean, he's basically 5'9". He's 33 years old. He relies on athleticism to get by at the position. When that starts going away, that starts, the rest of it kind of falls away. So I figured he would be out. There's no way I would have signed Vernon. I was kind of iffy on him to begin with. I was like, well, if they sign him, great. If they don't, great. I didn't really care. He's a complimentary piece, in my opinion. They're paying him. Well, I tweeted this out, that he has 29 career sacks, and he has more guaranteed money than J.J. Watt. J.J. Watt has had 2 seasons where he's compiled 20-plus sacks. So that just kind of shows you the silliness of that contract. So, for what they paid Mario Williams, that's what I would want Olivier Vernon to stay at. For $17 million a year, you can get that mess out of here. The trade, it's whatever. I think the Kiko Alonso is kind of the key in all of this. If you can get him back to his form and kind of running this, I know they said they want to run some of something like Seattle's defense, and I was kind of reading up on that again today, and I think he'll thrive in that kind of middle linebacker role if he can stay healthy. Byron Maxwell, I think, is an okay pickup. I think they'll, he's not going to suddenly become, Richard Sherman or anything, but I think he's going to show better than what he did in Philadelphia. And I like the fact that they're kind of staying low key. Before they were the kings of the offseason, they brought in all these players for big money, and Ndamukong Suh's a different kind of beast because players of his caliber rarely hit free agency. I didn't really mind the Brandon Albert situation because he's very necessary. Plays a key position that makes big money, so it wasn't a big deal. But I like it that they're being low key, just kind of looking for bargains. They're going to build through the draft and start building the team the correct way.
And that's pretty much my point, is that they're looking to apparently build the team without having to rely on big free agent pickups. So, okay, Ron, so now it's your turn. What are your thoughts on what's going on?
I just kind of have to, say it's a lot of the same things. Before we got into free agency, I said I didn't want them to go crazy in free agency because we see where that's gotten us. It's gotten us pretty much nowhere. I like that they're sticking to their price. I like that they're not trying to make a big splash. However, this strategy might have been better implemented in the last couple years. Perhaps it's the right strategy, but the wrong year to do it because of how much money is out there and how much higher these prices are going right now. Because of Jacksonville, Oakland to start with, and then add in Houston and the Giants being big spenders, it's kind of inflated the prices of some of these free agents and causing us to lose out on ones we were even targeting. So it's kind of a catch-22 in that aspect. So pretty much now they have to try and build this team to the draft. They really, for this year, don't have a whole lot of other strategies to go about building this team because we're very well short of the 90 players we'll have when we open camp. So we still don't know what this team will even look like come into July, beginning of August. But I'm just curious how they're going to go about it now because it's obvious that they've been shooting for some guys and missing. I mean, that's obviously no secret. At least 3 or 4 guys, including Miller, we've tried to sign, tried to keep, and haven't been able to do so. When it's a few, that's okay. When it's this many, it has me concerned as to what their plan B is for all of these players. I'm less concerned about the running back aspect. I'm very concerned about some depth at defensive end. I'm concerned about the cornerback spot probably more than I am anything, and feeling like that's what they should target in round 1. So in my mind, I'm kind of like, I asked for this and I wanted them to do this. And then sometimes it's be careful what you ask for because you might get it. That's great that they're not signing these guys. I just wonder what their plan is from here on And when they are going to at least start adding some depth, because we're kind of waiting for that, but perhaps that won't even happen until after the draft. Obviously, we know a lot of players will get signed and then it just kind of stops and everything goes on a holding pattern for 6 weeks. All the teams have their draft, and then some of these vets that are 30 years old looking for 1, maybe 2-year deals, some of these guys start getting signed. So will they even be going after some of those guys? They really may have at that point absolutely no option but to go sign some of those players, but perhaps after the draft.
And this is the point that I'm trying to make here, Ron, is that we're looking at this Dolphins team, and I think what's going on here is that we're trying to have our cake and eat it too. Now, before I continue, I wanna say that if anybody wants to jump in at all to say anything, I want you to go ahead and do that. Don't feel obligated to wait. If you want, you can just don't cut each other off every 10 seconds. That's all. So my point, the point that I'm looking at here, and I'm just looking at this from a perspective of, well, isn't this what you wanted? Like you said, Ron, isn't this what we wanted? We wanted the Dolphins to rebuild. We wanted them to take this approach. We wanted them to stop throwing money at every single free agent who is out there. And that's exactly what Miami's doing. But now people are upset that, oh, well, they're not spending enough money because free agents are going elsewhere. Well, that's what happens when you're a team that doesn't make the playoffs all the time. That's what happens when you don't have a quarterback who is elite beyond all description and can get people to come on a discount. So you have to be able to pick and choose when to spend money and when not to. Right now, Miami doesn't really have much to work with in the cap. I understand the whole, oh, we have 20 million, blah, 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 blah. The 20 million goes away really fast. So you Dolphins really don't have that much to work with right now. The talent that's currently out there, I'm not overly impressed with it to begin with. So if Miami decides not to sign anybody, I'm not going to get too hurt about it, because I had already written off 2016 as a rebuilding year. The Miami Dolphins need to rebuild. It's a new front office. It's a new head coach. The only thing that's pretty much the same is that Cam Wake is probably going to still be here. Ryan Tannehill is still the quarterback, at least for this year. I don't even know if he will be next year or not. And that's pretty much it. The wide receiver core, I guess, is going to be the same. So everything else about the Dolphins has changed. And now they're even changing their philosophy and approach to how they want to tackle the offseason. And once again, there are people who are not happy about it, because it's showing that the Dolphins are probably not going to win all over again. But there was somebody, I think it was Jeff Finsfan FTFN or something like that. I'm not sure his exact Twitter handle, but he said something that I think was poignant. You have to drain the infection before you can start the healing process. And the first thing that needs to happen is that you're going to have to probably take a year to just let this team heal up. Drain the infection. This infection is coming in the form of bad contracts that were signed over the past 3 years. You can blame Tannenbaum for that or not. I wouldn't, because Tannenbaum's only really been in charge since last year, and even last year it's debatable. And so I look at the Dolphins right now and I think, we're rebuilding. It's just that it is what it is. Now, obviously, Stephen Ross is not going to go out and say that, well, we're rebuilding, because he wants to win now, and I understand that. He's tired of losing. I'm not going to begrudge Ross for that. But I guess what it is that Miami fans wants to have their cake and eat it too. They want to rebuild, and at the same time they don't. And I think that's the biggest reason.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the question I have about that is, I've read a lot of stuff on Twitter and places, and people are like, oh, this Miami team's worse. And my response is, aside from Lamar Miller, how did this team really get worse? And when you think about it, most of the moves they made, in my opinion, were simply lateral moves. Now, you can argue Grimes and Maxwell. I think it's more of a lateral move. I think Grimes was out anyway. I think they're going to build a cornerback position through the draft. But everywhere else, Jamad Bushrod at guard is, not really any, I wouldn't say worse than, couldn't be worse than Dallas Thomas.
You can't be worse than Dallas Thomas.
And I still believe Jamal Douglas. I was at the Astros Zoo the third day of the draft last year, and I was trying to look at all the zoo animals and read tweets at the same time. And when Jamil Douglas was picked, there was about 5 to 8 tweets that came across from various sources of whatever. They said they're going to let him compete at left guard. and he never wants to play the snap at left guard. So I'm not writing him off yet. I'm not writing Billy Turner off yet. I think these guys can still develop. Dallas Thomas, I think he's seen what he's got. I was a bigger fan of Billy Turner being a tackle than a guard. I think his footwork, I think he's a guy that works better in space. And that's just kind of a hunch. But otherwise, I don't really see the Dolphins as being a worse team. I think if anything, they stayed about the same. They just got cheaper. So,
yeah, I don't think they're worse. I think you're right. I think those moves were all lateral, but how does that equate to rebuilding? I keep hearing that they're rebuilding. I don't see that. I think that they're the same team they were last year. And I don't see them getting any younger. The average age at defensive end, 33. You bring in a 31-year-old guy on the offensive line. You sign a backup quarterback. He's 31 years old. I don't see those as rebuilding moves. Where were they when Scott Tolzien was on the market? And what about Bobby Mayer?
I wouldn't have taken Scott Tolzien anyway.
Well,
the rebuilding process is.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I
didn't interrupt you. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm saying that the rebuilding process is going to happen through the draft, and it's not going to be this draft necessarily, but you got to think they're going to get all these comp picks coming into next year, with all the contracts that have gone out. So, I don't think they can be.
Hang on, Duke. As it stands right now, Miami's going to get a third rounder for Olivier Vernon and a fifth rounder for Lamar Miller. We don't know if they're going to get anything else just yet, but continue.
And so, that's still that's two free draft picks for letting, Miller, I think can be considered a loss. But, to me, I've seen this tweet go out that it was basically Mario Williams and a third round pick for Olivier Vernon, and that's kind of how I see it too. These guys are placeholders, and I've seen a lot of stuff about Cameron Wake, and Lewis can tell you, I came on the show last year and discussed trading Cameron Wake. But looking at it now, he's the guy that you keep because he's the face of the franchise. He's going to be in the Ring of Honor someday. The guy is a Dolphin legend. Unless he just doesn't want to be here, that's the guy you keep. And I know that people say, well, sometimes you got to cut bait with guys and move on. Well, he's not a guy you move on from. And, I'm glad they're keeping him. This is his last year on the contract. I don't know that they'll re-sign him next year, but, at least let him play out his final year here. And his cap hit's not really making a big difference at this point.
No,
I don't think there's nothing that you're going to cut him right now for to sign. The only thing you would do in that event would be cut him and then make a trade for somebody that's expensive, and I don't see that happening. So, I think they're going to rebuild through the draft. I think they could even trade down again from in the first, pick up some additional picks, just get some depth on the team. And, there's that comment that Tannenbaum made the other day that this team could beat the 2015 team. And a lot of people are like, how is that possible? And my first thought was Adam Gase or Joe Philbin. I think the coaching staff is going to make a significant difference. You heard Cameron, Jordan Cameron talking about buying into what Gase is doing. I think these guys, having played under Philbin and seen how that is, they're kind of like, yeah, this guy kind of gets it. I want to play for him. And, so I think that's what Mario Williams said. Yeah, there was a comfort level here. I think you're going to see him. I think you're going to see him thrive in this new role. So I think they can be competitive and rebuild at the same time. I don't mean competitive as in, they're going to make a deep playoff run. But I think they can be, a enjoyable team to watch. And, maybe, just maybe, make a run there toward the end.
If nothing else, it'd be fun to watch them grow.
Yeah, now Williams is going to be Ryan Tannehill. Because, if he can grow under Gase like we hope he can do, this whole not being able to audible mess and all of that stuff, I really think that, people can say what they want to about Tannehill, and I'm not going to get into a discussion of his qualities, but the fact that he could not audible and just everything that we know about. I think he was just so limited by the staff that I think Gase is going to be like, here, just go. And I think we're going to see, I think we're going to see kind of what we saw in that final game of the year, where he was taking, I think he threw like 10 deep balls that game. I mean, he was taking shot after shot because that's what the defense was giving him. He hit a few, missed a few, but I mean, I think that's what we're going to see. I think we're going to see that, finally get to see that gunslinger Tannehill that we all wanted to see. Whether it works or not, I don't know, but I think that's going to be key, and I think he's going to be successful under Gase, and that alone, I think, will make the Dolphins competitive.
The only thing that I would like to add is I know that they're going to rebuild through the draft, and I know that that's the primary avenue that you have to do that. But if you're going to rebuild, you do it with every single move you make, especially this time of year. You have to. If you're going to sign 31-year-old stopgaps, you do that in May. You don't do it in March. I think that right now these guys have to be looking for under-the-radar young guys that they can bring in and develop and compete. And I think that every time you sign somebody over the age of 30, that's a wasted roster spot that could have gone to somebody that, you could have used to build on for years to come. And, that's all that I'd like to point out. I understand, it's great to build through the draft, and I certainly hope that Tannenbaum can do that. But I really think that they're not going about it. Well, they're not going about it the way that I'd like to see them go about it. I don't think that they're going 100%. And I think you can stay competitive and get younger at the same time and bring in guys to compete. I think if you have a talented front office that can look at video and evaluate guys, figure out how they're going to fit into your scheme, get a good coaching staff in place, coach them up, you can develop building blocks and still be competitive at the same time. So, that's pretty much my point of view on that. And I hope they're rebuilding, and I hope that it works. But I have some doubt about the approach that they're taking, at least right now, this month.
Yeah, and I mean, I like the idea that they've got some, and to me, the older stopgaps aren't a problem, because I think they're going to be drafting their replacements. Mario Williams at 31, I mean, he's a guy that you could probably play defensive end, at a decent level, for another 3 years on him. I wouldn't put him at 34 being dominant, but he's a guy that can play well into that age. Offensive lineman, that's a different story. You're going to have to replace Brendan Albert at some point. But I mean, I like most of the moves. I mean, they brought in these stopgaps, and to me that tells me, all right, these are guys we can start right now and let our draft picks develop, and if the draft picks outplay them, draft picks will get the spot. I mean, I don't see, let's say they go defensive end in round one. Let's say Shaq Lawson or whatever. He's going to play kind of that Leo role, that wide edge rusher. Say he comes in and just dominates, or he plays well enough that he eats into the snaps of Mario Williams. I'm fine with that, because right now Mario Williams is a starter. He's going to start at right end or left end, depending on what they do with Wake. And I think if younger guys develop, and pass rusher is a position that, unless the guy's just incredibly gifted like Von Miller, they usually don't come in and just dominate in the first year anyway. So, a lot of these times they take a couple of years to develop. So, I like to stop gas, because eventually these guys are going to be gone, and it's going to be, the 2016 and 2017 draft class. And I think, and I'm hoping that, I'm not expecting anything from Deion Jordan, but if the Dolphins can get anything for him, that wide edge role, that Leo position where he can come off, that's Taylor. He's tailor-made for that. And I'm hoping, as I mentioned just a little bit earlier, that pretty much anything bad that happens, I'm going to chalk up to Joe Philbin and his staff, because they've earned it at this point. So if Gase, Vance Joseph, whoever can get through this guy, say, listen, you need to get it together, and he finally does get it together, I think they can get something out of him, and I'm hoping they do, because he is the ultimate ace in the hole right now, because you don't know what you're going to get, but if he produces like he should, or like you hope he could have when you draft him, then it's basically a free draft pick.
I think I think what needs to be defined here is the difference between rebuilding and tanking. Because it almost sounds like, Tom, I don't know if this is what you're trying to get across, but it sounds like to me is that unless Miami just flat out says, screw it, we're just going to get nobody and just draft everybody, then they're not really rebuilding. Because I don't think tanking, because that's what it sounds like you're describing to me. Like you want the Dolphins to suck on purpose so they can set it up for later.
That's really not what I meant. I meant you get your personnel talent evaluators in the front office to find good young talent, bring it in, develop it, and make your team better and make it younger at the same time. And there's no reason why you can't do that. It's done all the time. It's not easy. I admit, but that doesn't mean that you have to tank. It means that you have to get better and at the same time get younger. And maybe you have to bring in some guys and give them, a little bit of time to develop and play them and let them get better on the job. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to get that much worse at the same time. They're 6-10. They're not going to get a lot worse, to be perfectly honest.
Never a question worse, Tom.
I don't think so. I think there were a lot of things that went wrong last year that I really hope don't go wrong this year. You guys are talking about Billy Turner and Jamil Douglas. If they play next year the way that they played at the end of the year, there's going to be no hope. I mean, those guys, I hope it was coaching. I really do, because they were turnstiles. Jamil Douglas looked awful in the last couple of games last year.
At center, he's never played center.
Well, that's true enough. That's true. But so did Billy Turner. So did Billy Turner. I mean,
he's on the wrong side of the line.
The whole center looked. I don't believe that was the reason why.
No, I don't believe it was the reason why either. But it is the fact that he was being misused again. That misusage was the poster for the whole Dolphins coaching staff for the past 4 years. Let's just bring in people and use them the wrong way.
Here's the deal with Billy Turner and.
Those guys didn't look like they had a clue what they were doing last year. Anytime that you did anything, but straight up rush up the middle. If you brought a blitz, if you did any kind of a stunt, they were paralyzed. And I really hope it was coaching. I really do. I'm sorry, I interrupted again.
Well, they mentioned, I think it was Armando who wrote a post saying that the coaches had Turner and Dallas Thomas on like this, a very rigorous strength training regime. And Keith and I, Keith Beebe and I watched some tape from Billy Turner. And the first thing I noticed, number one, he's a good athlete. Number two was he was, to use a Mike Mayock phrase, he didn't have enough sand in the pants. And I think that hurt him at the guard position because you have to be able to, it's one thing when you're working with a 270-pound defensive end. It's another thing when you've got a 320-pound defensive tackle bearing down on you. And I just don't think he could handle that brute strength unless he was going forward. When they were running the ball, he could get some drive. When he was pass protection at that guard position, I just don't think it was his thing. So I think if they can work on that, the thing that stands out for me was in 2014. He only got a few snaps at tackle. In the final game of the year against the Jets, I think he played 19 or 20 snaps. He had 12 pass protecting snaps, and he did not allow a single pressure. Tannehill was sacked 7 times that game. So, I mean, he was getting beat up constantly, and Billy Turner did well at right tackle. I just think he's a guy that I would not be at all upset if they said, look, he's our swing tackle. We're going to put him in, and he's going to be our backup guy, and let him do that. I think he could excel at tackle because I think he's just got the footwork for it. I think it's a natural feel for him, and it's rare to see a guy that can't play guard but can play tackle, but that's just my hunch. I think he can do that. Douglas, I think you can move him to left guard, and that's a familiar position with him. At right guard, you're a little more on an island at times, and I think he struggled with that. But, I mean, honestly, I mean, Dallas Thomas was getting beat up constantly. And he had these moments where, it would be like he looks all right. I know in the Texans game, he had a pull, and he hit the right side and cleared out a linebacker and like a 30-yard run or something. It was, great play by a guard. But then there's times it'd be third down, and he just gets pushed on his rear end, and there's Tannehill, he doesn't have any pocket presence. Well, when you get the ball in your hands and you look up and your left guard is getting shoved to the ground like he's a rag doll, you'd like pocket presence too, So I think once you get rid of him and get some players in there, I think he'll be all right at the guard position, but I'm optimistic.
Okay, so I think we've taken care of the off-season stuff right now. So real quick before we get into our history lesson, Tom, you watched the Bears every single game last year because you were also a Bears guy. So I want to just real quick get your thoughts on what exactly you expect from our new head coach, Adam Gase.
Well, I can tell you he's a real good offensive coordinator. Jay Cutler was here 6 years before last year, and he was mentally weak, and I saw him flat give up on games. And last year, he had a trouble audibbling at the line. I understand that Tannehill's might have a little bit of a problem in that area as well.
His problem, Tom, was not his inability to audible. His problem was he wasn't allowed. At least Cutler got the chance to try.
Yeah, well, Cutler, he was trying and doing it wrong.
But he tried.
And it was a problem that emerged. And I've heard a lot of people doubt that they're going to be able to get Tannehill to be able to audible at the line. I watched them coach up Cutler at not a young age, 31, actually 32 last year, I think, and he was much better at it, much better. I laughed in preseason because I thought the guy thought he was Peyton Manning the way he was gesturing around and calling things out at the line, and I laughed because I didn't think he'd do it. And turned out he was all right at it. And I think they coached him up pretty good. I'm sure most of you guys probably saw the game against the Packers on Thanksgiving. And the Packers did what they've done many, many, many times before. They came out and they busted Cutler in the mouth. And he had a miserable first quarter. And I can tell you that for 6 years previous to that, he would have collapsed. And he didn't collapse last year, and they actually won that game. And that was the game that finally convinced me that maybe there was a chance that he's turned things around a little bit. And I think it was because of their confidence in the coaching staff. I think he finally had a offensive coaching staff that he had confidence in. And I think that when it happened last year, that he thought that they'd be able to turn it around. And that made him a lot more mentally tough than he used to be before. And again, this is something that I occasionally hear about Tannehill. Somebody will occasionally try to tell me that he's not mentally tough, he's soft. And some of that might be just confidence. And it's a confidence that Gase might be able to bring to him. Everything you heard about him being able to adjust to personnel on the field is true. Last year, he did a marvelous job of coordinating an offense that had no wide receivers. I mean, it was terrible. They were completely depleted. And I might add that the job that the staff did on defense was even better. We watched it happen in January as well. He was very good at changing the strategy of the game and using his players and putting them in a position to succeed, taking advantage of their talents. And I think he did that very well last year. So that's all true. The problem that I have with him is he's never been a head coach before. And so, this is the first staff that he's hired. He's hired a rookie defensive coordinator who is also doing everything for the first time. And I am kind of wondering if a lot of mistakes aren't going to be made, because now it's not about just coaching the players; it's about coaching the coaches. And there are a lot of coordinators out there. Wade Phillips is the king of them. They are great coordinators, born to be coordinators, but they're lousy head coaches. And the thing with Gase that we really want to see, I think, is whether he's going to be a good head coach as well as a good coordinator. And I think they take a different skill set, and it's going to be very interesting to see if he can make the adjustment this year.
Well, hopefully that'll happen. So, thanks for that quick little thoughts on Adam Gase. We've all shared our thoughts on Adam Gase before, so we all think that he can be really good. So I want to go ahead and get into our little history lesson. Now, Tom and I were discussing things on in our private messages a little earlier this morning, and he essentially asked me the question of why does he think that Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl? Now, obviously, that came about because of some other stuff that I told him had been said about Dan Marino. We'll also get into that like near the end of the show. I don't want to turn this into a Sun Sentinel beatdown all right off the bat, but so I want to do the little history lesson here and get Tom acclimated to the lore of the Miami Dolphins. So I'm going to start with you, Chad. Why do you think Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl? We all know how good he was, but why didn't he just get that ring?
Well, I mean, I think a Super Bowl isn't something that just happens easily. It's extremely difficult to make that happen. And I think, unfortunately, in the years, after that first couple of years, Miami's team had declined talent-wise. They just didn't have a very good defense. They didn't have a very good running game, and they were never able to get those things. And despite him being an amazing quarterback and an amazing player, football is played by 11 players, and it's been a long time, since the mid '80s, since Miami was fielding 11 players that were that good. And as good as Marino was, he was never on that great a team. I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
Ron?
Definitely the defense and more in particular Shula's devotion to Tom Olivadotti all those years, our defensive coordinator, who just wasn't very good. And they would have a defensive player here and there, but even the way they drafted, they just didn't draft to build a defense. They just kind of tried to draft everything around Marino, and then they kind of scrapped the whole 80s team and brought in the 90s team of Fryer and Ingram and Jackson and Keith Byers, and they would just always try and build the offense, but just the passing game. They would never work on the running game, and they would just never try to build that defense. When you have a quarterback like Marino, he's going to bring your offense up almost just about no matter who you put there. He was going to make those players better. They just never had a strategy to really try and build that kind of defense, and defense wins championships. Period in a story. And every time we've ever seen the number one defense play the number one offense, the number one defense always wins out. That's how you win championships. And they never had a defense like that. He had 1,000-yard rusher, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That wasn't even in the Shula time. That was in the Jimmy Johnson time. And the only reason he got 1,000 yards is because he ran the ball 330 times. He had like an average of 3.4, maybe. Pitiful. They just kept feeding him the ball to feed the ball. So it just, those are part of the reasons that he never was able to quite get that Super Bowl.
Duke?
Well, I mean, I just say what everybody else has said. I mean, he just did not have the quality of the team around him to get him over the edge. And when you look at what he did in the era that he did it in, I mean, we praise the quarterbacks now for all the numbers they have, but they have it so much easier. I mean, you can't look at the quarterback wrong without it being a penalty. Wide receivers can't, if they fall down wrong, it's a penalty on the defender. And that wasn't the case in the Dan Marino years. If you put him in this era, I don't see how he doesn't throw for 6,000 yards every year. He was just that good. I mean, there's great quarterbacks, and then there's Dan Marino. He was just that good. And, you hear all the other guys talk about the teams that were around him. Imagine taking Dan Marino off that team and just putting in a replacement level quarterback. Do they even make the playoffs? How many wins do they get? I mean, that's how good he was. He took, good talent and made it better to the point that, they were a playoff contending team. He just never had the great talent that he could raise to, Super Bowl level. And, it's a shame to see someone of that caliber not get those wins. But, like I said, defense wins championships is especially true in that era. Teams are built to run, to stop the run. And he came out with this passing offense that just was, foreign and pretty much changed the game. You wouldn't have the Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady's if it wasn't for Dan Marino. So, and after, talking through our great messages this morning, I know where you're going to go with that. So that's why I led it up to that.
So what do you think, Tom? Thoughts?
I do have some. You're not going to like them.
Oh, boy.
I'm not going to argue with you guys because I did not follow the Miami Dolphins too closely through the 1980s. But I will say this all came about because a man who shall not be named said that Marino
Not yet, anyway.
Because he wasn't good enough. And I will tell you that if you do Google search and type in the words, why didn't Dan Marino win a Super Bowl? In about 15 seconds, you'll come up with numerous web pages that will detail what they call cold, hard facts about the arguments that you made. And one very typical one is there was no good defense. Now, I did not see those defenses, and I am not a stats guy. I will say that right off the bat. So I'm not arguing.
We're not here to attack you, Tom, but go ahead.
I can tell you that, that the Dolphins during the 17 years that he played had the number one scoring defense twice. And they were in the top 10 or 12, something like 7 or 8 of those years. And I understand that they never had a running game, but they hardly ever attempted to run. And there were rumors, and I remember them, that Marino got the calls for the run in the huddle and changed them to pass. And that they passed all the time pretty much because that's what he called. And he does have quite an ego. I think you guys would acknowledge that.
Yeah,
it's not beyond. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that that's the case. And the last thing that people will point out, not a big fan of passer rating as a statistic, but in big games, particularly playoff games, his passer rating was 77.1. And detractors will tell you that he did not rise to the occasion in big games, and that was one of the reasons why he never won one. So I'm not defending it, but I will say that it will not be hard to find anyone outside of Miami that would tell you that he didn't win a Super Bowl because of some of his own flaws, rather than just all the guys that were around him. And I would say, and I think you guys would agree with this, if you asked anybody who the top 5 passers in NFL history were, Marino's name would come up amongst anyone who knew what they were talking about. If you asked them who the top 5 quarterbacks were, his name would rarely, if ever, come up. And I think that's partly because he didn't win a Super Bowl, but I think it may also tell you a little bit about, what people think about him in terms of his historical context. That's all.
Anybody want to?
I think there's another point to that is that there's also if you look at the success of the Patriots since 2000, part of what has aided their success is the fact that the AFC East has been bad the whole time. Buffalo has not been to the playoffs since 1999. The Jets were hit or miss. They had good teams in there. The Dolphins had, a couple of playoff teams in there, and that's it. And so the Patriots have kind of had this clear run to their division and the playoffs. when you look at what Dan Marino faced, you had teams like the 49ers with Joe Montana and very good teams, the Cowboys and the Bills in the 90s. I mean, he was a good enough quarterback to win multiple Super Bowls, but the teams just went up to par with those caliber of teams. I mean, you wouldn't sit here and say, I mean, you could argue, who's a better quarterback, Troy Aikman or Dan Marino. But no one will ever argue that those early 90s Cowboys teams were, that they weren't better, much better than the Dolphins teams at those times. So, I mean, I think that plays a factor too. He played the position as well as anybody, just ran into better teams, and they're the ones with the championships.
So I guess we're kind of it's really a matter of what I guess there is a point to what Tom is saying is that Dolphins fans kind of see it a little differently. Like Tom said that anybody outside of Miami probably wouldn't put Marino in the top 10 quarterbacks or top 5 quarterbacks of all time or whatever. And I guess it's because of the lack of Super Bowls. But have you actually talked to people outside of Miami other than us about Dan Marino and what they think of him? Is this where you're getting this from?
I've picked up, things here and there over the years. Let's just put it that way. And this will often come up. It comes up on national radio programs every once in a while. There are a surprising number of people who do not like him, and occasionally it will come up, and you'll get somebody that'll quote facts and tell you that all the excuses that people make for him are not valid excuses. I do not necessarily believe that. I believe that he was a very, very good quarterback, actually, and the games that I saw him play, there was very little doubt that as a passer, he was one of the best ever. The reason I said that about the top 5 quarterbacks is because it's coming up a lot right now, because Peyton Manning is retiring and Tom Brady, God willing, won't be too far behind him. And those two guys rate in the top 5. And it's just a question of who your other 3 are. And, Montana always comes up. Guys like Favre come up. Aaron Rodgers is already coming up, and I think that's probably well-deserved. Admittedly, all recent names, well, yeah, I don't know if I'd put Favre in my top 5 quarterbacks, but I loved him as a football player. And there's a little bit of a difference there. I mean, I don't know. And I may have a different perspective on him because I'm sitting in Chicago, so I probably say a lot.
No, man, it's fine. Like, although I will say this, there was only one quarterback who was able to take out your perfect season years ago.
I mean,
Vaughn told me to say that.
The supposed best defense in the history of the NFL had one loss, and that loss was to Dan Marino, brother.
Yeah.
Now, see, I'm going to bring back my 8th grade arguments that I made when people would tell me Dan Marino wasn't good. That was always one of the ones I pulled out of the can.
The thing is about the whole argument is he's retired. There's no way to actually know that, because I could make, based on what you're saying and being in Chicago, I could make the statement that Emmitt Smith by far was a better running back than Walter Payton because he had more yards, he won more championships, so clearly he was better than Walter Payton, and it had nothing to do with the teams the Cowboys had versus the teams the Bears had. And if I were to say that to a Bears fan, they would probably lose it, thinking, "Oh my God, have you even seen Walter Payton run?" And versus Emmitt Smith. And so the point I always like to make, I think when people try to get hung up on who's the best of all time, this isn't basketball. That's what I tell people. I think you can make a stronger case and say, Magic Johnson or Michael Jordan or whoever is the best basketball player of all time because those players are so much more impactful to the sport. But when you're talking football, there's just so many more variables in place. And so, I always tell people, Dan Marino was one of the great quarterbacks of all time. And beyond that, there's no way you can say that, whether it's Joe Montana or John Elway or Peyton Manning or Tom Brady, because everybody has their own opinions and reasons on why they're at. But the reality is every year they won the Super Bowl was from a lot of different players. And that's the reality. I mean, so if you were to ask me if I were to take Dan Marino and put him on the 85 Bears, I'm pretty sure he would have won the Super Bowl that year. I mean, that team was just phenomenal. But so that's why I get into those arguments. I usually don't stay in them too long because it's not something that's ever possible to settle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you find yourself arguing against players that you really like. I love him. He was low to the ground. He was tough to bring down. I loved him as a runner. I think he's a great running back. You know, why would I want to spend my time arguing that he wasn't as good as Walter Payton? You know, a guy that I like that much, I don't want to sit and try to bring him down in any way. So I agree with you. I don't like discussions like that. Generally speaking, I avoid them.
But they happen because it's all about rankings and who's the best and all that stuff. And of course, people are gonna talking basketball. People are already putting LeBron in that conversation. Steph Curry's already there now. Who's gonna be better than Jordan? Who's gonna be the next Jordan? Who's gonna be the next Brady? Who's gonna be the next Peyton Manning? That's just the way things are now. Folks,
well, I mean, and that brings up a good point, Lewis, because people say, well, who's the next Jordan? And that's your measure for, you know, who's the next player that's going to reach that level of greatness. And right now it's Peyton Manning and Tom Brady. But when they were, you know, coming up, it was who's the next Dan Marino?
That's right.
I mean, or Joe Montana. I mean, to me, that's the kind of you know, who's going to be the guy to break these records? Who's going to be the guy to pass like that? And, you know, I mean, to me, when I think about it, being of that age, it's always, to me, you know, if people say who's going to be like that, it was Dan Marino and Joe Montana. Maybe John Elway in there. But those are the guys that are going out now. That's who they were, you know, they were compared to that. So the next group is coming in, well, who's the next Tom Brady? And then somebody's going to rise up, and who's the next, you know, I don't know, Marcus Mariota or whoever, you know, I'm sticking a name here. But you know what I'm saying? There's always that level. So, you know, when your name gets associated with that comparison, you know, you're a good quarterback. And Dan Marino was that guy.
And just for the sake of argument, I would probably not even put Joe Montana in the same passing level as Dan Marino, because I mean, Joe Montana for a long time had one of the best wide receiver to probably ever play the game to throw to, and Marino, you know, didn't.
But now, I mean, and Joe Montana doesn't have the statistical stuff that Dan Marino had, but
he has that win-loss record, and the
guy was clutch. I mean, if there was a guy right now, yeah, I mean, if you had to say, all right, your team is facing, you know, some alien race that's going to destroy the earth if you lose this football game, and you need a quarterback to take you down the field and win the game, who would you pick?
Space Gridiron?
Sure. And, I mean, to me, there's going to be, one or two names that pop up. Unfortunately, Tom Brady's one of them, and Joe Montana's another one, and that may be the only two. And as much as you love Dan Marino, what he said earlier was right about can he step up in big games. You know, those guys, you know, have done it. And it's just one of those things when Joe Montana got the ball at the end of the game, he was going to win. And, you know, and that's what I talked about on the Sim side, and I talked about with Keith and some others is, you know, there comes a point when you're watching a football game, and let's take the Dolphins out. You're watching another football game, and you're watching that quarterback, and as soon as he steps on the field, you just have that feeling, you know, he's going to win. You know, I want Tannehill to get that level. When he gets to that level, he steps on the field, you know, like, they're going to win. Tannehill's taking the field. I want that level of comfort. And Dan Marino was one of those guys. Tom Brady and Joe Montana was one of those guys. Yeah, that, to me, that's why Montana's in that conversation, because it's like, you needed to win. If you need to win everything, he was your guy.
So it boils down to if you're down 6 points in the fourth quarter and you need to win, you'd pick Montana. But if you need like a regular season quarterback, you'd probably pick Marino or something like that.
Well, if you're looking at that, I mean, it would be Peyton Manning. I mean, that guy's the king of regular season wins, and his playoff record's kind of not very good. So you need a regular season win, put Peyton Manning in. You want a postseason win, put Tom Brady in. That's kind of Joe Montana was that guy in the 80s. It's like, his team's down, he's going to get that win. It was going to happen. It was just meant to be.
Yep. So, folks, I want to go. We're gonna wrap this show up pretty soon, but first I need to. Wait, Ron.
Yes, sir.
What's going on, man?
What do you mean? What's going on? What are we talking about?
Nothing happened. Okay.
I had a rough day on Twitter, guys. Between Omar Kelly and the Jets fans, I don't know.
Yeah,
it was a rough day on Twitter.
Yeah, we're getting to that part of the show. So, folks, if you're a fan of the Sun Sentinel, I would advise you just stop listening now. So, okay, here we go. So, the whole point that made me want to talk about this stuff right now is essentially that Tom is learning what it's like to be on Dolphins Twitter, and he's still trying to figure out who he should and shouldn't listen to. Now, he hasn't interacted with the Sun Sentinel people as much as we have. We haven't seen what they say, and so far, Tom's not necessarily seeing what's the problem with Omar. So, well, guys, let's try to be nice on air about it, but one by one, and I'm gonna go from left to right on my screen here. So, what's your problem with the Sentinel, Chad Ronenbaum? Go.
Oh, I don't have any problem with the Sun Sentinel at all. I honestly don't have any personal issues with Omar Kelly. The only thing I ever point out with him is that people need to understand he is not giving you a non-biased opinion. He's highlighting the players that give him access in the locker room, and he's bringing down the players that don't. And so that's just something you got to be aware of. And so if the guy's a University of Miami player, for example, he has a lot of historical ties into the University of players. He knows a lot of those players. He's going to be very positive on University of Miami player. He's going to be very negative on some players, including Tannehill, because Tannehill won't grant him interviews. He wants nothing to do with him, and that hurts his career. And so the point I usually make is if you're following Omar, you're getting not a real good view of what's going on from the team or a really good review of a player, because he is putting out what benefits him directly. And you just have to understand that when you're following what he says.
Duke, I know you have issues.
Well, first of all, the Sun Sentinel changed the website a while back, and it became unbearable to even go on the site.
Yeah, I don't like reading them from them either.
I have that beef with him, but what Chad is saying, I mean, Omar is he comes at it from his angle, and you can't. I mean, it's all part of the game. You have to, nobody's going to think their opinion is wrong. You don't. I think Tannehill is great. I'm wrong about that. I mean, you're not going to do that, but he comes across very abrasive on Twitter, and I think that kind of turns people off. Whereas, number one, you're a beat writer. You're supposed to be reporting things. We don't care about who you think the best rap artist is of all time either. And I don't mind guys talking about, personal stuff, if that's what he wants to do, but it's just following him was becoming unbearable. And when you disagree with him, we talked on there about Dan Marino. We've discussed and disagreed. Nobody's got on here and said, you're wrong, you suck, just sit in the corner, blah, 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 all that stuff that he does. It's just this, agree with me, or I won't have to deal with you kind of stuff. And not only that, he's not very good at what he does. I mean, when Adam Gase was hired, every beat writer in Miami was telling us Adam Gase was hired, and Omar tweeted out that Miami had interest in Sean Payton. I mean, it was just so out of left field.
And Hugh Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, it's like they just sit back and throw a dart at the dartboard, and that's what they're going to write about today. It's just terrible. And like Chad said, he's very biased. He cannot write an article that even mentions Tannehill without throwing a dig at Tannehill at some point. It's going to happen. If you read something, so it's, and the parody accounts on Twitter are fun. They just mock him because he's changing his mind. And it goes back to that Marino thing. When you use these crazy stats, it's always about passer rating with him, which I'm not a fan of passer rating, but you paint yourself in this corner. Well, Tannehill's not good because he doesn't win. He's not good enough to win, blah, blah, blah. And then Dan Marino didn't win a championship, and then he's painting himself in this corner where he has to say Dan Marino wasn't good enough because if I say otherwise, then I'm going to undermine everything that I've said on Twitter for years. So, there's some of that. There's much, much better Dolphins people to follow on Twitter that you can get great information from without having to put up with.
And some of those people he is also called out. Let's say Barry Jackson of the Herald. Just saying.
Well, there's that. And then I think he really kind of jumped the shark when he got in line with Nico Grimes. That was just, I mean, he put her on his show. They were bosom buddies, and then she went off the deep end and looked completely like a lunatic, and he had no choice but to kind of cover for her. But that's what you do, You jump in with crazy, you want to deal with it. And I think that kind of, once he did that, the people kind of like, well, she's crazy at the back, and he's buddy with her, and they kind of think the same thing. Yeah, I'm just not going to deal with him. I think that just kind of, for most of what I consider normal Dolphins Twitter, they kind of just disregarded him after that stuff.
All right, Ron, you're the last one here. So I know you, just like me, you also thought that Omar was something special when you first got started, and then as time went on, it quickly changed. So go ahead, tell us your experience.
Well, I have to say that before I did podcasting, writing, any of that, before I even conceived of doing any of that, I got on Twitter before I even had a smartphone, and the tweets came to me in the form of texts. And probably the only person I ever really followed for the most part was Omar Kelly. I mean, I didn't care what anybody else had to say. I listened to Omar Kelly exclusively. It was nothing but Omar Kelly, Omar Kelly, Omar Kelly. And then all of a sudden I just started to see some things or see him say some things that I just thought were odd. And I'll start with this one. Somebody challenged him that he wasn't breaking any stories. Mind you, he never breaks stories. Everyone else always breaks stories, and I've seen him break stories that ended up being wrong most of the time anyway. This guy is not a story breaker, and that's just a fact. But somebody challenged him on that, and he kind of went back at him, and then this guy mentioned Armando, and he said, and this is years ago, way before the Miko was even in the picture, I don't even know who that guy is. And I thought to myself, it's just an intelligent human being who's not on the inside. I'm like, doesn't he sit in a press room with him every single day? What do you mean you don't know who he is? Let's really. Then later on, during the Miko times, Armando, who actually is on WQAM, by the way, the same station he's on. Again, he claims to not know this guy, and him and Miko called him some blogger. So the disrespect he shows just to his peers alone, based off his ego, is ridiculous. Now let's talk about the way he sides with his boys. The night that the Pouncey brothers were wearing their Free Hernandez, Omar Kelly was there, not as in a reporting function. He was there because he was invited by his boys, the Pounceys. So
I didn't know that.
Yes, he was. He was there because I remember seeing the invite when I was following him nonstop. And then sure enough, he was there and said he was there. And of course, he defends them, which is stupid, but they're his boys. So whoever his boy is, he's going to defend no matter how bad that player. Chris McCain, that guy's not very good. But, Omar Kelly talks about, he's my man crush, and he's so good, and he's so great, and, the man's just trying to keep him down. No, he's just not a good player. But, of course, you're going to defend him. And then when him and Miko started getting together on their show, I mean, that was just the beginning of the end. And then he did them Dan Marino comments. Dan Marino wasn't good enough to win a quarterback and to win a Super Bowl and whatnot. Well, I can name 15 quarterbacks that have won Super Bowls that no one would argue were as good as Dan Marino. So that's just a stupid argument in my mind anyway. And then today alone, I should say last night, I worked a really late shift. I see this tweet from Omar that, Kiko Alonso, our new linebacker, pretty much Omar Kelly is just saying, this guy is no good. We better sign Sean Spence. We're going to be in trouble. This guy's garbage. So I took the tweet. I found Kiko Alonso on Twitter, which I had not yet. And I just said, and I quoted his tweet and said, "Welcome to Miami, Kiko." So Kiko Alonso would see the tweet. Sure enough, that morning I went and looked through and I noticed that tweet was just a link. And I said, I think I know what happened. He blocked me for that. All I did was retweet your tweet, brother. That's all I did. I retweeted you. When I asked him on my other Twitter account, my old one, which I used to follow, I said, "Why did you block me for retweeting your own words?" And he said, "You had a clear violation of the Omar Kelly rules." Whatever. What a pompous ass, dude. I cannot stand that guy. He's ridiculous. I mean, ridiculous. He's not a reporter, man. He's just a guy out there running his mouth, looking for clicks, looking for fame, if you want to call it. That's all he is. If you can't listen to or trust anything the guy says about the Dolphins, because it all comes from a biased opinion. None of it is reporting. None of it is journalism. It's just him shooting off his mouth about his opinion. Now, if he wants to be a person who's just gives out opinions and has a talk show, that's fine. But he plays off like a journalist. He's not a journalist. He's like a talk show host who writes articles, but he's not a journalist. He just gives opinions. That's it. And that's fine if you want to be that, but own that. He tries to be like he's a journalist, and I just personally don't think he is. That's my opinion on it.
And one thing you mentioned about players he likes. Number one, you hit on one chat that he's a Kiko's bad son, Sean Spence. Where's Sean Spence from?
He's from the University of Miami too?
Yes.
Oh, of course he is.
Imagine that.
The thing you've got to understand is whoever's listening to the show, if you follow him and he starts talking about draft stuff. All right, I noticed this. It was the 2014 draft. Somebody was tweeting him about C.J. Mosley. And I remember it clear as day. He was like, he didn't know who that was. He was like, I haven't studied tape yet or whatever. And it was like when the masses started saying, "Hey, this C.J. Mosley guy's pretty good." Then he followed up and was like, "Yeah, I think the Dolphins need to draft him." Then C.J. Mosley gets to the Pro Bowl, and he was like, "What did I tell you? Players own more life. They go to the Pro Bowl. The Dolphins should listen to me, blah, blah, blah." I'm like, dude, seriously, people on our site were talking about C.J. Mosley before you even knew who that guy was, and he's trying to claim like he called this stuff. I mean, it's Bush League is what it is. And I will say, and I'm going to say enough, but I will say that during this last, I think it kind of started with the Miko stuff and all that. Armando has risen to the top. That dude has set himself aside. He's the Joe Montana of the Miami beat writers. He stepped up to his game. Everybody else is just falling behind.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Armando. He's a nice guy, and I've talked to him several times before. He's a nice guy, and Barry is too. I mean, the entirety of the Herald guys. Well, Adam's a nice guy too, but he's been wrong a few times, so that's kind of what makes him. That kind of what burns him in the Dolphins Twitterverse. And mind you, we're making Dolphins Twitter seem a lot bigger than it really is. I mean, it's not like the Dolphins organization doesn't live or die by what happens on Twitter, but that's just what social media is now. That's just the world that we technically have to live in. We pretty much all see each other every day. We always see Ian. We always see Jeff. We always see Duke. We always see me. We see Ron. We see all these guys. It's become, thanks to Twitter, it's become a big community. These are the big players in the Dolphins fan base, I guess. Chris Barker, you see him all the time. You see all the guys, Matthew Kanata, Max Himmelrich. You see Chad. You see EJ. You see all these guys. We have become like the big. like I don't like to. It makes it sound like I'm tooting our own horns here, but it's like we are the regular voice of the Dolphins fan base, and there's two factions. There's the faction that likes to try and analyze things, and then there's the faction that says that whatever someone else says, we're just going to go with it. And a lot of the people who follow Omar are just those kinds of people that say, well, whatever Omar says, we're just going to go with it because he said so. And that leaves you with no room to grow in learning football. If I had continued to follow Omar the way that I used to, I still would not know a lot of what I know. I never would have learned that quarterback rating is more a rating of to rate the entire offense as a whole and not just the quarterback. I never would have learned how team football actually affects everything else around what's happening. I never would have learned half of this stuff. And when you're following Omar, you're essentially putting a handicap on yourself. If you try to go beyond what he says, if you try to look at things from a different angle maybe and try to see, well, maybe there's this and this had a factor into it and this made a difference, then you start to realize that when you go back and look at what he says, they're like, now, wait a minute. Based on what I just saw, that doesn't make sense. And that's something that a lot of people have come to realize about him.
And let's not just pick on him. I mean, it's the entire Sun Sentinel staff. I mean, seriously, have they put out anything that you've read that was just like, wow, man, that was enjoyable to read. That was just great. I mean, it's like they're just throwing stuff to the wall to see what sticks. And I think they're kind of led by him. He's the veteran thing. The only problem I have with being blocked by Omar is that
he watches
until Lewis. I'm sorry?
He watches you?
No, he blocks me.
Oh, okay. I thought he said he watches you. I was like, huh?
I know when I got blocked because I was responding to you about something, and I said, yeah, he needs to stay in his lane. And it was about 5 minutes after that, I noticed I was blocked. So it's like, yeah, I finally won. But the only thing that I really missed was he was one of the few that was really on the ball when it came to training camp. And Armando put out like a tweet every 5 minutes or something or whatever, and he was always like every 2 minutes. Now, granted, it came with a little bit of bias, but he was always reporting stuff. And for somebody that can't be there to watch that, and he cares about that stuff, you like hearing that. So I will give props to Lewis because he kind of stepped up and took over that role. And actually, Omar kind of dropped off. He just got to where it wasn't as good anymore. He just wasn't tweeting out as much stuff. And so you have to follow guys like Lewis or other fans that go to the game who kind of are good at training camp and tweet this stuff out without the bias in there, and actually do it every couple of minutes so you're getting up-to-date stuff, not sitting there hitting refresh or whatever, waiting for a new tweet to pop up 5 minutes later to see, oh, there was a pass throw.
So, Tom, you were about to say something. So, now that go ahead.
First of all, a lot of things I'm hearing about Omar Kelly, I'm not liking. I'll be quite careful when I read him to try to keep some of this stuff in mind. Every writer has biases, and you have to read them a lot to realize what those are and be able to understand when you read them that that's what their biases are, and you have to take that into account. And that is true almost no matter who it is. And it sounds like he has more than the usual amount, which I don't like hearing. And I don't like hearing that he makes up stories.
Who can forget this? Who can forget this? Hang on. Sorry, Tom. I didn't mean to cut you off, but who can forget the story where
Tannehill,
the Tannehill story about how he called out the practice squad player's paycheck, and Mr. Robot Man Tannehill himself came out and said, "I did not mention anything about a paycheck." He did mention. He even admitted. He said something about the trophy, but he never touched the guy's paycheck.
Yeah,
but
the practice squad.
And in fact, Tannehill called that slanderous.
It was.
Well, it was, and it caused a national situation. That went national. It was a total lie. He tried to say he had sources for it, but it turns out the sources were Miko's boys, Chris McCain and others. It was pretty obvious who it was. Number one.
We're making assumptions, Ron.
Yeah, I'm making assumptions that we're assuming it was his boys. But here's not an assumption. When it came to those sources actually stepping up and saying that this happened, asking one person to go on record to say yes, he said that, crickets, because it never happened. In fact, the players there that did speak up said that was never said, and I was right next to him. It was a total lie, a fabrication made up by Omar Kelly and Miko Grimes, and that is not journalism, and that's kind of crap that gets me ticked off.
Yeah, and not only that, Chris McCain, who I think he was the practice squad trophy, which I personally think is just great trash talk. That's good. But he actually going on Twitter after all the stuff came out and was like, some of the stuff needs to be kept in house, and he was pretty much kind of not really trying to keep it hush. He was kind of like, this is nonsense, y'all. This is stupid stuff. This doesn't need to be out there. And so he was the guy that this stuff was kind of directed at, and he was even kind of getting defensive about it. So yeah.
So yeah.
But I'm gonna think something.
Go ahead, Tom.
The other thing that resonated with me, I just wanted to make sure that I got it in while I was thinking about it. What you said, Luis, kind of hit me right when you said that you couldn't just read Omar Kelly and believe what he had to say. You had to use your own eyes, look and see what was going on, and understand where that differed from what he was telling you in order to learn about the game. That is not just Omar Kelly. That is also virtually everyone. And the best example that I can think of recently is one that I believe it was you and Ron brought up on his podcast about Olivier Vernon. And Field Yates said that he was a wall against the run. I got news for you. He ain't the only one. Andy Benoit, who usually knows what he's talking about for MMQB, said the same thing. A lot of these guys say the same thing. And nobody who watched that guy play could possibly believe that he was any good against the run. He was a lightweight. And the reason why these guys all say it, I'm convinced of it. One guy says it who they think, who they trust. They're following 32 teams. They can't follow them all. So one guy says it who they trust, and all of a sudden it's like an echo chamber. And they all live in an echo chamber. And they all repeat it one after another. And they're guys that you listen to ordinarily. And you have to watch with your own eyes. And you can't just trust what they all say, or you're going to be wrong. And whoever says that Olivier Vernon is a wall against the run is wrong. All you have to do is watch. Anybody who watches him knows that that's not right. But you'll hear it nationally. I had somebody challenge me on Twitter who said that he was good against the run. And he said, all the experts say the same thing. And I said, well, I got to tell you, I got eyes. And they tell me he's not. And that's what I trust. And I think that that's a rule that you have to live by.
You cannot become a sheep.
One thing that I would mention that we talked about from the Phinsider is that Keith lives in Chicago. James used to live in Dallas, the Dallas area. Had people all around, and they all pretty much said the same thing, that, I mean, every sports team in every city has negative guys. They're down on the teams. I live here in Kansas country. I've asked people that are Kansas fans that follow the team religiously, and of those different areas, and including here in North Carolina, none of them have a beat writer that is consistently putting down a player or players on their team like Omar Kelly does. I mean, what was that he said about Tannehill? He's still waiting for his balls to drop. I mean, seriously?
Yeah, he said that. Yeah, that's a quote.
Yeah,
that's a quote. That's just purely disrespectful. I've never heard a reporter say something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, so you say things like this, and it's just this constant negativity. And it's not like, he's saying, Tannehill, if there were a 6-10 team, he didn't do enough to win games. It's just this constant, like, I don't want to say bullying.
He's vulgar.
It's just that kind of stuff. And all these people, I asked a guy I work with, he's a huge Panthers fan. He said, yeah, there was a guy like that for the Charlotte Observer. And he doesn't work for the Observer no more. They got rid of him. And it's not like the Panthers were always this great team. I mean, they were 2-11 just a few years ago, or 2-14. I'm sorry, really bad. So it just seems like all these people from different areas of the country are saying the same thing. It's like no beat writer they know of in those areas beat up a single player the way Omar beats up on Tannehill. I mean, to me, when you've got something like that, that's a sign of something else. And like Chad said, whether it's interviews or it's what it is against him, and yet the guy's still putting stuff out there. It's like, no one cares. And what was that? That guy, the Big O show or whatever, put out that tweet the other day.
Orlando Security or whatever.
Yeah, he put out that it looked like a car that's on fire, and he was kind of poking fun at Martavis Bryant, and people like bashing him for that. And I mean, I don't know the whole situation. Apparently, Martavis Bryant's dealing with some depression or something. I don't know. Anyway, a serious situation, and these are the people that are always saying stuff about Tannehill. It's kind of like, maybe you're right, but nobody wants to listen to you just because the way you act. That's why Nico and Omar has fallen into that.
And a lot of other people who say the same thing are kind of in that same circle. You notice that Mike Freeman, who's apparently good friends with Nico because he thinks that the NFL's truth teller, and of course it's that same general circle. It was Mike Freeman who wrote about how it really doesn't matter what the Dolphins do until they get rid of the engine that's supposedly trying to run it, which is Ryan Tannehill. And of course Omar said cough cough because he thinks that that's absolutely the problem.
Well, one question I have, because I don't believe half the stuff I see on there. Did Roto World really say that? Didn't Omar mention something about Calais Campbell being on the trade block? And Roto World put something that some fentanyl was not reliable, and they don't use him as a source. Did that really happen? I'm asking a serious question.
I didn't.
I think I might have that tweet handy. But
he's saying is like, was that tweet photoshopped or something?
Yeah, you know what? That I'm not sure about.
See, I went on Roto World and I couldn't find it. Now I know they update pretty regularly, so I might have missed that. But I just went to look to see, did they actually say that? Because if that's the case, I mean, how can that not be, condemning? It's like here's a football, and their whole purpose in Roto World is not to break stories. They're just a kind of a catch-off site where you come to get news and they link stuff. And they actually said, no, we don't use this place as a source because they're not very good at it. I mean, how much more evidence do you need?
So, yeah, there you go, Tom. This is why it's like proceed with caution.
Yeah, I agree. I get your point. I will. I agree with you. I will proceed with caution. I don't like some of the things I'm hearing.
I could tell you, we could really spend the next 3 hours just talking about it, but we've already been going on for 2 hours now, and I think it's about time to wrap this show up. So, I want to thank you, Tom, for joining us for the first time. Do you have a good time?
Oh, it was a great time. My pleasure. Thank you. I'd love to come back.
Well, we'll certainly have you on again soon. So, my co-host Chad Ronenbaum bowed out a little while ago. So for myself, my co-host who is no longer here, Ron Kniff of right now of PhinManiacs, Tom Shannon of PhinManiacs, and of course my good friend Chris Early, otherwise known as Duke of the Phinsiders with a PH. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening, and we'll see you all next time for another edition of the PhinManiacs.com podcast. Good night.